Evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, everyone who is logging in and who is going to be listening to the recording. Yesterday, we had a fantastic day with a very passionate two speeches. Inauguration speech by the head of UNESCO, Eric Falt, who was the former ADG of UNESCO in the UN in New York, now head of office in New Delhi for the South Asia cluster, and Professor Stefan Lehman. Who gave a very passionate, total approach speech, integrating built environment, sustainable development, and climate change. And very fittingly, today we have the Professor Carola Hein, Professor Dr. Carola Hein, who is the UNESCO chair for water, ports, and historic cities. And so her focus is water, ports, and the future of sustainable tourism. And I'm so glad that Dr. Benny Kuriakose is online, Kerala, because he's one of the India's preeminent conservation architects working on that whole stretch called, Mosque or Spice Strip of Kerala, with all the ports and everything. He's been rehabilitating the whole coastal area as a conservation architect. He's online, so hopefully he'll have some questions. But as I mentioned yesterday, we're not going to do introductions because everybody's CV is on the webpage. So you've all read, and so Professor Carola Hein is already sharing. She's already sharing a presentation. Carola, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks a lot for the invitation to this great conference. And I would like to, well, share my fascination on water, ports, and the historic urban landscape approach with you as a means to look into the future of sustainable tourism. And I'm really curious on what your reactions will be and your thoughts. But let me first say a few words on where I come from or what we are doing. So we have launched an initiative called Port City Futures, which is hosted by the Leiden, Delft, Erasmus universities in the Western Netherlands. And our goal is to look at the shared spaces, the society, the culture, particularly of port city territories, because we believe that there are unique expressions of this water and culture nexus. And so take a look there. We have a number of blogs around these topics, podcasts, films, activities. And this is also where I put most of the things from the UNESCO chair on water, ports, and historic cities. Now, what are we talking about when we think about water, ports, and tourism in the first place? Well, these kinds of images will probably come to the mind of many of you when you think about the topic. The huge cruise ships in front of the tiny village-like, size-like, or the old city of Venice, for example. Now, this is a type of tourism that is both on sea and on land, and definitely not sustainable for many ways. So the fact that tourism has overrun Venice is widely known. Corona gave it perhaps a bit of a break, but it is more or less back to earlier practices, although the city is now thinking of selling kind of visas, entries to coming in. And they're also thinking of new practices to get people into the city who will use the city itself as a working space rather than coming in for a day or two or a half a day and leaving again. The cruises are also gone now, and they can't get as close to the city anymore because these kind of tourism has been hurting the foundations of the city, moving the water in unacceptable ways. Now, just this image still, and it's happening in other parts of the world where cruise shipping is transforming mostly smaller settlements. This image, which tourists see, is perhaps not the only one that should be promoted under the umbrella of sustainable tourism. This is certainly the postcard image of the city, and I'm sure many of you will have seen it. It's this typical waterfront, the city that can't expand anymore, the most beautiful business card of a city oriented towards the sea. But what might be much more interesting to look into in the context of sustainable tourism is the lagoon as a whole, because that is what really makes Venice so interesting. And I also like this system because this area of the lagoon is almost not visible as a water ecosystem. There are a number of sustainable tours that take you into the lagoon itself. And that is also the place where the water ecosystem becomes a topic in itself. Now, when you look at the map, this is what we were shown on the boat the other day. You see a couple of really fascinating things. So Venice itself, as detached from the port of Marghera, which you see here, and the locations on land. But you also see that the lagoon itself has a very shallow bottom, with the exception of a few of these darker blue lines. Now, these dark blue lines are the shipping canals that allow for access to the port areas behind it. So these are in fact channels that are dug, that are dredged into the bottom of the lagoon to allow this access. Now you could ask, do we even want to have these kinds of boats all the way into the hinterland, or are there other ways to get tourists, but also goods towards the Italian land? Now, this lagoon in Venice has been managed for centuries very, very carefully with elements here. There was death penalty on the pollution of the lagoon. Shaping the bottom of the lagoon was highly prohibited, all with this idea to manage this very delicate ecosystem and maintain the livability of the area. Now, today we've had way more intensive interventions than in the past, and these are not really helping the health of the lagoon. And part of this health of the lagoon approach is also to say, where do we send tourists? What kind of messages do we actually spread? Now, rather than looking at the city only as the postcard picture, what if we visited the city or revisited the city in its entirety and in the context of the waters of the lagoon, as it is also shown here? And what if we looked at all the different elements, the celebrations of the city, including its paintings, through the lens of water? Because here, Neptune offering gifts to Venice is really a story about water. And then we could reread even those key places in the terms of high level, in terms of the high level of water, in terms of water management and how it has been done through the centuries. And this water management was not only, or is not only stones or wood, it is really part of an entire institution and an entire culture that was set up around it. Now, there were certainly also things that we wouldn't want to repeat today in terms of social justice or even gender equality. But nonetheless, I think these can give us good ideas of how complex water systems are and what the different spatial, social, cultural elements are that are embedded. Now, to make it a bit more specific on a location, this is the interior of the Doge's palace, and it's really a water site. Now, you're going to tell me, well, I don't see a drop of water on this image, but effectively what you see is a rain capturing device. So all of these stones collect the rainwater. The rainwater will seep into the ground and it can be taken out from the fountain here. So it's a very intricate system, which to the point that it needed management. So whenever the waters of the lagoon, the salty waters, the brackish waters swept over this area, they would dirty the sand that was there to clean up the water, and the whole system had to be dug up and recycled. Now, when you hear these kinds of stories, it's really about a very individual or community-based water management that is very much in contrary to the more public systems that we are having in most locations today. So how about thinking about sustainable tourism also as an educational tool, a way to reconceptualize, rediscover historical water practices, and ideally even making them hands-on. And another way of thinking about such practices, water practices over time, is also temporality. So we could ask, well, in this case, shouldn't we just be living with water? And why do we expect that we're also always completely protected? Could there be moments where we say, during a certain period of the day or the season, a specific area is being flooded? That would require that we think about the porosity between sea and land in novel ways. So we would have to accept that there's not one clean, stony line, wooden line between water and land, but that there could be areas that are occasionally flooded and occasionally accessible. So that is a new or different lifestyle concept, which we've had in the past, that we could be reviving. Instead, what we see today in terms of water management are structures like these. And you could also say this is well, it's also a kind of heritage structure. It is definitely designed, this is the Mosque, which is designed to protect Venice from floods. So it's a barrier that is that rises whenever there is a high water levels. But it also means that if that stays shut for too long, the water in the lagoon become brackish and are no longer, well, supporting the kind of life and non-humans that we want there, that we were expecting. So, and it is very expensive, shutting down the barrier. Now, having this kind of intervention of water engineers, of large-scale projects, is potentially also based on a value, on an approach that we are resisting water, which may or may not be in line with future water practices. So rather than having these kinds of resisting against water approaches, we may need to switch towards more resilient ones. And where why does this not switch there? And where I started is to say, well, all of these ships that are going, for example, to the oil port of Marghera have to go through the Venice Lagoon. Is that something that we want, or do we need a larger scale planning to rethink the way in which we use the Venice Lagoon? So in this sense, what I've been trying to tell you is this nexus of water and culture through the lens of tourism, and particularly with the hotspots of port cities, because these port cities, particularly industrial ones like these, are the ones where the most important economic challenges and the cultural challenges come together. Here once more, the port seen from the lagoon. So what we've been trying to do is to capture these dualities, these conflicting interests, in a number of drawings like this one, where we look at port cities as hubs often of cultural diversity, as hubs of heritage, as hubs of migration over time. So they are cultural artifacts and heritage places, but they're also places of innovation and of economy. So these huge cruise ships, for example, are exactly capturing that. But it's only one example. So we've tried to capture this in diverse images, like the ones that you see here. I showed you the duality of heritage and migration, but also think about the interests of small local governments in the face of large companies that may be coming in through ports, through shipping, or even including cruise shipping. So the question for the futures will also be, how do we deal with this intersection, for example, of culture and production, which again could be a nice into the questions of sustainable tourism. Because much of these means also that ports are hubs of transportation. Tourism is often linked to transportation, but how will this continue in the future? Maybe our future cruise ships will be all about virtual reality, and they will just stay in front of the ports where they started. So that might be another way of rethinking this. There are other questions, if I just stay with cruise ships for a moment, if you think of beautiful coasts like Amalfi or so, these places, these heritage places, become purely backgrounds for what we see. Now, this is not just the problem of Venice. There are plenty of other waterfronts and cities that face similar tourist challenges. Now, cities as big as Hamburg, for example, often benefit from the presence of the tourists. Hamburg has managed to bring its cruise ships close to the city center. People can step off the boat, and actually the urban redevelopment of the Hafen city benefits from this presence. This is not true everywhere. I mean, you know all of these examples, and you can probably tell local stories, be it about Sydney and the waterfront with the Opera House, or be it about other locations around the world where we are facing similar problems. The case of Skikda is interesting through the expansion of the port, and this is one of these typical moments where you have an ancient city with lots of ancient heritage. So it's a heritage attraction, it's also a beach location, and it is a big export port for petroleum. So how do you combine these critical infrastructures that are located next to each other in a very often very delicate natural environment? And that's why I find this nexus of water ports and historic cities so fascinating. There are a number of institutions, for example, in Le Havre, the AIVP, Association Internationale Ville-Port, and that are taking care of this relation or looking into this relation between water and land, between ports and cities, with the goal, I would argue, that we need to revive the historical mindsets, the approaches that have traditionally been very resilient in port cities, because historically the different stakeholders were all about promoting the transmission of goods, of people, and so they have been working in the same direction. For that reason, I think that port cities could actually be the kind of stewards that we need to develop the future water culture and new maritime mindsets that help us develop new solutions for water, ports, and historic cities. Now, in this vein, we have developed a number of free online open courses, and I'm certainly also inviting all of you to look into them and to take them, with the idea that we need to understand the past, understand how systems like port city territories, like water systems, have traditionally worked in space, in society and culture, to explore how these traditional systems have been transformed, how several select objects were identified as heritage and protected by heritage institutions, and often taken out of the general everyday life of settlements. That's where we see that some historic water fountains, for example, have become protected sites, and they are no longer integrated in what people do every day because their water comes out of the public water systems. So with these courses, we are trying to, so this is one of them on reimagining port cities, and the other is on waterworks. So here we are trying to recreate a system thinking that is going across multiple scales, so from the building to the territory, that acknowledge the long term, so that understands what has happened in the past over long periods of time, and that can then also be used to project into the future the time that we actually, what is possible to happen, say, in the next 20, 30 years, or even 50, 60, 100 years, so that we understand the long term of the past for the long term of the future. And to do that, I believe we need a transdisciplinary collaboration. So these two courses are set up around these premises, and Waterworks, for example, concludes also with the opportunities that the UNESCO Historic Urban Landscape approach affords us to embed heritage in its broader environment, in its tangible and into the everyday culture, and ultimately to help sustainable development. So there could be the question, how could we use and activate heritage tourism, for example, to promote an understanding of water as a system and a larger and facilitate actual sustainable development. One of the underlying ideas for this is to say that we should start with water, so that the sea is a common good. And in places, say, like the Mediterranean, this is obvious. I mean, the Mediterranean has been shaped by shipping and maritime practices for centuries, and it's expressed in all these different cities, from Venice to Naples, from Barcelona to Tangiers, Skikda, and you name it. And I think similar practices exist all around the world. We have a bit forgotten about them, and we have lost our knowledge of the sea in multiple ways. So what we've called with Nancy Cooling, with a colleague, the blankness of the sea. The sea is no longer this territory of imaginations. It has become a space that can be industrialized, into which we seemingly can dump anything that we can't really have a plan for on land. So this is another dimension of saying, how can we reconceptualize tourism, for example, around with this lens of water, be it in cities from the wells that I showed you, to the water of the sea as a common factor. And in the water MOOC, we've also looked at questions, for example, of changing water patterns versus preservation. There are certainly people who will say, oh, it's great that the new sea routes are opening up because of the rising sea levels. But at the same time, many of our heritage sites are disappearing in the waters. So how do we want to respond to that? And Paula Vigano, professor from Venice, in a film that we made for UNESCO on this topic, on water, ports, and historic cities, she said, if you want to save Venice, you have to save the world. And I think that is kind of the message that we can very nicely spread around, around water practices, particularly in port cities. So the way that we think about sustainable tourism, to come back to this topic, is also about which sites do we promote, how do we introduce these sites, how do we take people to these sites, and when necessary, how can we potentially keep tourism more local? For example, also making the beauty of Venice accessible for locals, as happened in the time of Corona, and not just have tourists go to a large number of places in a 2-week period or in a 1-week period traveling through Europe, for example. So in line with all these general talk about blue economy, blue ecology, blue, blue history, blue, and there's a lot of blue going on right now, we could also argue that we need blue tourism, blue sustainable tourism, a water-aware tourism that actually promotes existing water systems rather than help destroying them. So that we could, and I'm speculating here, show to or with tourists that water is more than H2O, that heritage is more than museum, that value in water is more than economics, that it's actually a culture-based approach, and that heritage has to be promoted, but also has to be protected, but can also promote sustainable development. And in this context, I would argue that urban deltas and port cities can really be the stewards of sustainable development. And often I think we are forgetting about the power of the past. The Netherlands, for example, is a country that has shaped its water system for hundreds of years, creating institutions to manage it, creating legal tools, or even different layers. So in this case, you see the different provinces and the way that water, that is, because they have too much water, water is discharged to other parts of the country, and actually discharging water can also be a hassle for some of these places. Now, many of you will have seen these nice windmills of Kinderdijk, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But rather than seeing them purely as beautiful windmills, discussing them as part of a water management approach that is really a unique heritage of the Netherlands as a whole, I would argue. But understanding them also in the context of institutional discussions. So for example, here we see a water mill, this building in the foreground, which uses water to generate energy. But the water was flowing back into the low-lying areas of the country, and it needed then some 5 or so windmills to get the water back out. So the burden of water was shifted, and the benefits and the burdens were not in the same hands. So while these people had the benefits, others had to take on the burden to actually discharge the water again. Now, it took 300 years to solve this problem, but I think looking at these buildings, explaining them in the context of water systems, and using that explanation to think about contemporary systems could be an intriguing approach also within sustainable tourism. And I'm sure you can tell similar stories about all kinds of water heritage sites around the world, or of diverse depictions of water heritage. Now, what I've been telling you is in part of an initiative that we are also leading with ICOMOS NL and other partners, including through a book we've made on adaptive strategies for water heritage, which can also be downloaded for free. And to conclude with, I just wanted to show you, well, make 2 more links. So one of these links, as I already said, is that I think an approach through water towards the landscape, water as a system, can also link the water and heritage fields by saying that the historic urban landscape approach of UNESCO can be revisited through a water-based approach. And so we can bring heritage to water and water to heritage. One way how we are currently doing it and looking at it is that we are finishing a port city atlas, which is currently for 100 seaport territories around Europe. They've all been chosen based on flows, maritime flows. So there's 25 cities per sea. And what this shows us when we look at the maps themselves is that each of these port city territory hosts the same types of goods, the same types of ships, but each of it is completely different in terms of territorial distribution, in terms of urban densities, etc. But port cities have always been attracting people from around the world, new ideas, new initiatives, and at the same time, and they are serving the same purposes, but they also have very different challenges to face. If we are able through the mapping, just GIS-based mapping, to recognize shared challenges, say underwater heritage in front of the coasts or Natura 2000 sites, we hope that we can make impact beyond beyond the connections that individual ports have already among each other, but really create shared ideas and necessities between the different port city territories involved. So I will stop here, and I hope I've given you a little bit of food of thought about why water, ports, and heritage can matter for sustainable tourism. So thank you very much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Carola. That was super. In fact, I couldn't help thinking about later on. When in 2011, I was next door to him at the UNESCO World Heritage Center. We were arguing about the historical urban landscapes recommendation, the draft offer. And I kept on giving Vietnamese examples, saying that 1/3 of the population depends on water. Halong Bay is about waterscapes. So maybe, like you suggested, it's time to revisit 10 years down the track that Hull recommendation and incorporate waterscapes as well. Or maybe we should look forward to a new recommendation dealing with historical water landscapes. And I know some people would support it that are listening, like Dr. Benny Kuriakos, who deals with the cultural landscapes of the backwaters of Kerala in rehabilitating Muziris and all the port sites. And also Ray Sheridan, who is online, one of the um, great activists and publishers on climate change and the Great Barrier Reef, and leading the activism from NGOs in Queensland. She's also online. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but is it okay if we move on to the next speaker and take the questions afterwards? Yeah.
Unfortunately, I may not be able to rejoin afterwards, but I would like to just quickly respond to the comment also in the chat. Yes, the Kannats are a beautiful example. We have a PhD also working on them, and they are much more of an integrated landscape, even beyond the actual sites that we see. They are integrated into gardening, into wadis, and all kinds of other important practices. And there are beautiful examples from Chinese rice terraces, etc., etc. And we are collecting them. I will do one more thing, sorry. We are collecting them for the World Water Forum in New York in 2023. So if anyone has ideas or is interested, please do feel free to send me an email. I'm definitely looking for all kinds of collaboration around water, history, heritage, and culture.
Thanks, Carola. I think Thompson has posted a link. People want to ask questions and so on. So you'll get it, because the discussion is ongoing, as I mentioned before. But I really appreciate, given your busy schedule, that you took the time out to join us. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Now, Thompson, if you could allow Dr. Manoj Kumar Kinney to be co-host. He's got.
He should be able to share. He should be able to share his screen now. Let me know if for some reason you cannot.
Yeah, I'm just trying. Thank you.
Kerala, while you're still there, Dr. Manoj Kumar Kinney, it says Manoj Kinney, it's actually Manoj Kumar Kinney. He's in charge of culture, tourism, various aspects for the state of Kerala. One of the young dynamic people, young next generation for me, who is an architect and a designer. He'll be looking at, Kerala and its waterscapes and cultural landscapes.
Yes, so definitely, please do send me an email. And Marvi also said we would catch up. It would be lovely if you could connect me to anyone who has wonderful examples. Mm-hmm. So don't hesitate to be in touch.
Dr. Kumar Kinney, are you able to share your screen, or did you want me to?
I'm just trying, just a minute.
Sorry about that. Just let me know if you need anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thompson, I can't see that Dr. Kumar is a host. You have to make him a co-host, don't you? I can't hear
I was on mute. I have made it so that he can share his screen, so he should be able to do it.
Now he should be able to.
Yeah, the button is down the bottom.
Can you see that?
No, we can't see yours. There's a blue, it's sort of, for me, the share screen button is down the bottom, and it's sort of an upwards arrow. And you have to have the document that you want to share open already on your computer.
I know that. I know that there's some problem. Just a minute. Can you see that?
Yeah, fantastic.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I won't be introducing Dr. Manoj Kumar. You've all seen his bio online. He's the managing director of Missouri's Heritage Project. And over to you, Dr. Kumar.
thank you. Thank you for inviting me for presenting. I'm just going to speak on the concept of living museum as a response to heritage conservation with respect to Missouri's project in Kerala. So India is one of the world's oldest civilization, as we know, and has a rich legacy that encompasses a wide variety of faiths, traditions, and customs. The treasure of Indian art, architecture, classical dance, music, flora and fauna, as well as the ingrained secular mindset of its people are all highlights of Indian heritage. A trip to a heritage site is like taking a stroll through history, including the dynasties that ruled Indian lands, and the elegance of Indian craftsmanship, the richness of silk and cotton textiles, and the ethnicity of jewelry. Every Indian state has its own distinct cuisine, which is a legacy and a component of Indian culture. Each Indian state's heritage defines its identity. It highlights a sense of cultural kinship with a specific society. Some examples include customs, languages, or structures that were built in the past and still have historical significance. Human rights legislation recognizes everyone's right to a healthy environment and the right to their culture. Article 51A of the Indian Constitution places a duty on the nation to preserve its cultural legacy, while Article 49 of the Constitution provides for monument protection. Tangible cultural heritage must continue to be relevant, practiced, and learned by communities, and be passed down through generations to be preserved. Safeguards are necessary to secure the transmission of intangible cultural treasures from one generation to the next to prevent their risk of dying out or disappearing. Management of cultural heritage requires significant and the dissemination of knowledge and awareness among the public. Articles 49 and 51A F of India requires raising awareness of the importance of preserving cultural assets. We are living proof of a long history of civilization and religion. The architectural literacy, tactile or ethereal magnificence of India's legacy is impressive and alluring. They have endured the test of time, the wrath of nature, and our abhorrent carelessness. So now it is our responsibility and prerogative to conserve and preserve it for future generations to observe and learn. In spite of its richness in terms of tangible and intangible heritage, India significantly lacks a culture of documentation of its heritage. It is something which I have to admit. There are very few instances of our indigenous techniques or artworks either recorded or documented for future references. Built heritage conservation is an interdisciplinary endeavor in which historic building knowledge is transferred to the sphere of current conservation engineering practitioners with the goal of fusing it with the contemporary technologies and procedures. In spite of having one of the greatest inventories of heritage buildings worldwide, India faces major challenges in understanding and defending these buildings from natural disasters, aging, and impacts of elements. More importantly, in a nation with deep spiritual roots, the preservation of built heritage and history must consider the principles behind the ancient construction systems, the significance of the spirit in the building process, and the idea that material things are impermanent. Such a strategy can be at odds with well-established, generally recognized conservation strategies. Intangible heritage is also in a similar state. There are very few avenues that seek to keep this acumen for heritage alive in the community. We can witness many such traditional practices and techniques missed because of neglect and subsequent lack of interest in them. These have often even pushed entire communities into limbo due to the unemployment and the loss of livelihood. The authorities that are responsible should be able to rehabilitate or come up with a program to encourage revenue generation from such avenues. As I am supposed to speak on Kerala, for Kerala, one of the southern states of India and also known as God's own country, has a very rich cultural and historical background attached to it. Kerala enjoys the heritage of its past, ranging from classical forms of art and craft to practices and cuisines imbibed by its foreign invaders. Kerala has had a very dynamic maritime history due to a strategic location that facilitated the immense transoceanic trade. These key characteristics were devoted to the identification and preservation of heritage, tangible and intangible in Kerala, as a result of which projects like Musiris project came into existence. As you know that Dr. Benny Kuriakose is here, who is leading this particular movement here in Kerala. This also seeks to promote the value that our heritage and culture adds to the overall betterment of our society. That is the crux, especially in the post-pandemic era. Kerala relies significantly on its tourism sector for income generation, almost 10% of its economy. And following the devastation during 2018 floods, Kerala was only recovering from the shambles it had fallen into the tourism sector when COVID struck in 2020. While expectations were high for the growth of the sector, the pandemic put all of it to a lull as the world went into an instantaneous shutdown. Hence, it was necessary to come up with a revival scheme to regain the lost glory of Kerala tourism. The major change that has been implemented in the sector is a major switch from the destination tourism that has for long prevailed in the state to a dedicated focus on experiential tourism with the aid of our strong background in heritage. I'm going to speak on that. Consequently, the projects like the Musiris project, Talashiri Heritage Project, etc., have been delineated to cater to this new wave in the tourism sector. This approach not only will act as a booster for the tourism industry, but also as a tool to promote integrated conservation of heritage in Kerala. Asset generation in this context includes the identification and delineation of tangible and intangible heritage. The process to make use of these assets to nurture living museums in the state. A living museum, also known as living history museum, is a type of museum that seeks to provide visitors with an experiential interpretation of history. It helps to interpret through actions and presence. This way, the visitors will get to understand as well as experience life as it was in the periods of these artifacts and historic structures. Furthermore, it will provide an avenue for the careful and comprehensive conservation of these entities of cultural heritage while making them economically viable and income generating. This is far more pronounced in societies like ours, where there isn't a very noticeable museum culture. That is something which we have to accept again. Museums are often considered boring spaces here, where one is only visually stimulated and has a very passive approach to taking an information. Therefore, this new concept of living museum will be a fresh take on the problem at hand, where simultaneously these are unthinkable expanses of heritage still to be discovered, as well as modern life spouting at the same site. Kerala has an immense unexplored wealth of coastal heritage that bore witness in ranging politics and trade over, just a minute, 3,000 years that eventually defined the history of Kerala. The Spice Route project is a clear example of how this is implemented in Kerala. The Spice Route project is aimed at sharing heritage among the 31 countries along the ancient route. This initiative is expected to bring a substantial number of foreign tourists to Kerala to trace the historic journey. The centerpiece of this project is the Kochi-Kodungalur belt in the central Kerala, where the ancient spice port of Musaris was located and where merchants from West Asia and the Mediterranean region came by sea and land. The proposed spice route heritage project will connect almost all districts in Kerala. It will connect all major ports, including Thiruvananthapuram, Kollam, Anchithengu, Alappuzha, Kochi, Ponani, Panthalayani, Parappanangani, Baipur, Calicut, Talasheri, Kannur, and Baikal. Besides, the ancient trade routes in North Kerala will be connected to the Musaris Heritage Project. The Spice Route Heritage Project would also link the cardamom and tea cultivation in Wayanad, Anchirakandi, Asia's largest cinnamon farm, and spice trading centers at Valyangadi, the Dho Building Center at Baipur, and the proposed Kunyali Marakar Museum at Kottakkal. The remnants of the port and its erstwhile glory still remains as reminders of the eventful past as Musaris. These are being conserved and preserved the future generations through one of India's largest conservation projects, the Musaris Heritage Project. Supplementing the Musaris heritage sites, there are 21 museums and other landmarks that aim to educate people about 2000 years of Kerala's history. There are many larger landmarks that are undergoing conservation under this project, which you can see from this slide. There are 51 sites. One is the Paravur Synagogue that has been evaluated and conserved for the better. So as for the objectives of the projects are concerned, you can see all these things are like management of the sites, the intangible heritage, education and interpretation, research and monitoring, managing operational impacts, enhancing natural environment, interpreting archaeology, visitor management and tourism, transportation facilities and architectural conservation, all becomes the objectives of the project. These are the project components, starting from excavation, exploration, conservation, infrastructure development, revitalization of the rural markets, and academic research, all becomes the part of this process. The Paravur market, this example is the Paravur Synagogue that has been evaluated and conserved for the better. The Paravur market will regain its traditional look, which will give the visitors a new and different experience. The history and understanding of the market activities will be an interesting piece of information for the visitors. The market and its activities, along with the setting of the traditional buildings on the bank of Paravur River, will provide a beautiful shopping experience. The hop on hop of boat services in the first of its kind in the country and transverses the hotspots in the erstwhile Musaris region, the hub of Kerala's ancient spice trade, connecting it all. The service includes 3 fully air-conditioned boats that can carry 25 passengers each. And there are 3 circuits arranged to cater the diverse tourist base. I'm just explaining these things just to explain how this project is, aiding the local economy, boosting up the economy of the place, and involving the public participation in this process. Similarly, there are 3 circuits here. I'm not going to explain the whole thing. So all these 3 circuits are designed in such a way that it is integrating the local economy. It is getting the people into this place. Also, it is used as a matter of, educating the kids regarding the history and heritage of the place so that they will carry it forward. Similarly, the Aleppi Heritage Project is also an example where former godowns and coir factories are adaptively reused as museums. The complex houses a living choir museum, a library, and a cafe. It would also provide visitors with an exquisite learning experience of the choir factory process, from choir wrapping, beaming, through the weaving of choir mats and other goods. And it's a live session. So a living museum where the existing rundown factories will be converted to showcase live demonstrations of the choir making process. It will be interactive using the panels, graphics, and audiovisual mediums. As far as Kochi Heritage Project is concerned, parts of Kochi, Mattancherry, and Fort Kochi that have also been an integral part of the spice trade in Kerala are also a part of the spice route narrative. Today, it has transformed into an agglomeration of coastal enclave where different cultures, beliefs, customs, and faiths sprawl together in harmony. Community-based initiatives like participatory house tours, storytelling sessions, guided tours, etc., will make tours and museum hopping exponentially more interesting. With only few remaining Jewish families in Fort Kochi, it is important that their existence and story be amplified. These initiatives can only be successful with the support of the members of the community who are willing to engage in order to ensure authenticity. So far, this has been a successful model in the Kerala context, and this model has not only helped in attaining new heights in terms of tourism, but also in the conservation and preservation of the tangible and intangible heritage. It has greatly helped in generating awareness as well as sensitivity among the public on the values of heritage conservation and allied tourism opportunities. This model also ensures there are many opportunities and avenues for local engagement and economic growth. It helps bring people together, the life and people of the sites into such initiatives, thereby fostering community involvement and livelihood development. At this point, I'd like to discuss a few strategies that provided to be helpful in our endeavors to execute the Spice Route project. I'm just not going to read through this. You can just go through that, how we did it, starting from the survey, then understanding the potential of the research, providing guidance on conservation practices, preparation of conservation plans, documenting the geological and natural layers, etc., etc. So it was a laborious process through which, starting from the academics to professionals, to common people, to the politicians, and the entire sections of the society were involved in this process. So my point here is, what I would like to argue here is, living museum as a concept, I think it is the best for a place like Kerala, where we do have a density of more than 6,000 people per square kilometer, living tightly packed. Almost 90 lakh is the population of the coastal zone. And for a place like this, I believe the concept of living museum is the best adaptable strategy to conserve heritage and to be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. That's wonderful. I mean, the holistic approach that you're advocating, something very badly needed. And you also very clearly mentioned the situation of museums in India, but how Kerala is able to transform and provide a systematic approach. In fact, to the listeners, Kerala is the only state in India which actually has a museum policy. The country doesn't, but Kerala does. So it's very exciting what you're talking about, living history museums, and what in some other parts of the world we call eco-museums, to bring everything together. And you also emphasize the importance of storytelling to reanimate museums, which is exciting. Now we'll have the next speaker, and then we'll take questions together, Dr. Kumar. So Dr. Benny Kuriakose is next speaker. Tamsin, if you could make Dr. Benny Kuriakose co-host.
Yeah. I hope I could stop within the limited time.
Yeah.
You're a co-host now, so you should be able to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, thanks. I'll just, let me try. Yeah, I can share the screen.
Perfect, we can see it.
Okay, right. So I'll just play and I'll just do. Thanks, Manoj, for giving a wonderful presentation about Muziris. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about Muziris, how we dealt with some of the issues of the pandemic and the post-pandemic conservation and some of the challenges that we are going to face as part of this thing. Muziris Heritage was the pilot project of the government of Kerala. And after that, there has been, as Manoj said, there has been multiple projects which has been launched, which are in various stages of implementation. As Dr. Amareshwar has said, that this is one of the states where heritage has been seen as a developmental project. When I was asked to do Muziris Heritage project 14 years ago, I'm still in charge of the project. I'm doing a project for 14 years. What I was trying to see, it was seen as a global project. It was seen as a cultural pilgrimage. And it's a walk through 3,000 years of Kerala's history. And Kerala's history is linked with the history of many countries, because Muziris is the place where the Jews had come, the Arabs have come, the Portuguese has come, the Dutch has come, the British has come. Everybody left a trace of their own. So this is in a particular small area of say 100 or 150 square kilometers, where we can see this different layers of history in this area. And also it is very interesting to note that 3 religions came to India through this Muziris port. One is Judaism, Christianity. Christianity might have come to Kerala even before it came to Europe, at least certain parts of Europe. Islam came in the 7th century, that is what is believed. It is the first mosque in India. It is the first synagogue in India. It is the oldest surviving European monument in India, and some of the oldest seminaries and Catholic churches are also located in this area. This is something which is mentioned in various records very clearly. See, it is mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It is very clearly mentioned about Muziris, how it is approached by the sea route. It is mentioned in Pliny's natural history book, which was, I think it's 77 AD. It is mentioned, Muziris is mentioned. I'm just trying to tell about how historically important this port is. How historically, Manoj has mentioned that we had links with more than 30 countries, which is clearly, Ptolemy has mentioned about it in the 150 AD, that Musri Emporium was a seaport city that was ruled at that time by Keraputras, which is a corrupted version of the Cheraputras or Keralaputras. So that way, this place is uniquely important. Agannaru, one of the Sangam literature, one of the, Tamil South Indian literature, which is more than 2,000. There were various texts as part of the this thing. In one of the texts, which is called Agannaru, which is in the 2,000 years old text, it is mentioned in Cheras prosperous Muchiri town, the huge and beautiful Chuli river flows, muddled with white forms. The Evanas means Greeks. The Greeks came with their fine ships bearing gold and left with pepper. So many ships. So all these things describes about the importance of history. This is the map which is kept in the Vienna Museum. I'm showing only a bit of the map, and you can see Muziris on the right-hand bottom corner of the place. This is a 4th century AD map, which is there. So this port is historically very important. And if you look at Kochi, which is more famous, has only 600 years of history, where Muziris is 2,000 years. This was a sleeping historic place. Nobody bothered about it. Even the people in Kerala did not bother about this heritage, I will say about 15 years ago. But the excavations done in Muziris created a tremendous amount of information about its historic links. So the government of Kerala launched it as an alternative approach to heritage management. And conservation of heritage is the primary objective. It's history and conservation which drives the project. Otherwise, Muziris doesn't have a great relevance. As I told, I was just trying to mention about the historical aspects of it. And all these heritage, which were in a very dilapidated state, were conserved as part of the Muziris Heritage Project by the government of Kerala. So this project has assumed an importance. There's still lots to be done. We are still working on the project as part of the whole thing. Now, the pandemic has it slowed down the Muziris project. Not only the Muziris project, most of the projects have been slowed down. It is clearly shown that health is a very social issue. It's not just to be dealt by the private hospitals and the health insurance companies. And we realize the importance of the community in preventing the spread of the pandemic. And the community has to act. The role of the community became very, very important as part of the pandemic. So today Manoj just talked about the historical, how the project is going on at different pages. I'm trying to give another aspect of the project where a community involvement is happening in the case of Musiris project. And one of the, although it is a government sponsored project and no non-governmental organizations are involved, community is very much involved as part of the project. Community is very much involved, not only they are very much involved in the decision-making mechanism, and that is what I'm going to do. And I think the part that the Musiris project or the projects which are offshoots of Musiris project, where the communities was involved in a big way, we were able to address some of the issues the pandemic has raised. As part of the tourism, everybody, millions of jobs are at risk if there is no tourism. Even our model, although various government departments are involved in the project, as there are more than 19 government agencies are involved in the Musiris project. They have done one small part or some major part as part of the project. The driving department is the Department of Tourism. And it's happened with all the major projects in India. The tourism, the conservation is driven by tourism. And if there is no tourism, there is no conservation, because our models have all been built around cultural tourism and heritage tourism. In the Musiris project, we were aware of this, but we wanted history and conservation to drive tourism, rather than tourism driving history and conservation. So we might not be a big tourist place now, but we hope that in the long term, when you look at sustainable tourism, this becomes very, very important. So I'm just going to talk about the community involvement. You see, one of the first things as part of the models, what we did, there are 10 local bodies or local authorities, which are local governments. And we took 10 people from each of the department right at the beginning of the project. And these people were volunteers. They were not on a remuneration, they were not on a permanent basis, but those who could, those who were interested in history and conservation, these were the ambassadors of the project. They formed the link between the community and the government. So these people found out what is important in local history, what is being forgotten, what is not being cared about, what is the reaction of the people. So all these, and these people were trained to look at conservation. These people were trained to look at heritage and history. And there were people who were university students, there were retired people, there were housewives, everybody is part of the project. And these people discuss, dialogue with the community on why is Musiris, what is Musiris, how is the Musiris project being done. I'll just give you this example. This is a chapel in one of the historic areas. So we said that, what you see on the left-hand side is how the chapel looked like when we started doing the project. It looks like an advertisement for one of the paint companies. So we said, and it's in a historic area. What you can see, it's on the riverfront. So we said that at least the color should be changed for the project. So we used to do using the Photoshop and various things. We said the project can look something like this. And that's what we tried to do as this. But to our surprise, the community came forward saying that the chapel, they were ashamed of the chapel on the left, and they said they wanted to demolish it. It was subsequently demolished. And I given 2 designs for the chapel. One is the exact replica of what it was there. And I also give a contemporary kind of design, which could have been, which goes in with the historic setting. You can see the steps and the paving and everything, and you can see the old chapel, the chapel, which is very modern with the multicolored paints, was demolished, and it was replaced by a replica of the chapel, which shows the involvement of the community. I will give you another example. This is the mosque. This is how the oldest mosque in India used to look like. It was by the side of a large water body. Now this water body is not existing. It has been filled and converted into a best stand or best shelter. And this is how it used to look like, the black and white. Most of the mosques used to look like temples or typical Kerala architecture. But what has happened in the 90s, this is a photograph I took of the same mosque in 1984 when I visited the mosque. And you started having the concrete additions, the minarets and the domes. I mean, this is some influence of the Gulf, the Middle East. I mean, a lot of people from Kerala went and worked in the Middle East. They started seeing the mosque in the, say, in the countries like Saudi Arabia or Dubai or Sharjah or Oman and all those things. And they came with their ideas. The money has started pouring in, and this is how some of those. So this is a change which has been made in the 70s. And this is what has happened in the 90s. So this is a photograph I've taken about a few years ago when I visited the mosque, and you can see again further additions has been made to the mosque with concrete and steel truss and all those things, trying to make it look like one of those traditional buildings which you can see in this. And we suggested that the mosque, it doesn't fit in with the historic thing. To our surprise, the mosque authorities, it was nothing imposed on the government or anything. To our surprise, the mosque authorities decided to reconstruct or remove the ugly additions. And they approached Musri's Heritage Project, and we made a proposal of how to do it. So the entire ugly additions will be removed and we will restore it. The core, historic core was conserved as part of the project, but we suggested how the mosque, there were some requirements for the mosque authorities that if all the additions are removed, instead of 2,000 people, only 300 people can pray. So they just wanted a place where 2,000 people can pray at the same time. So we gave two proposals. One is to have a large roof where the older mosque is put it in that. The other thing is to have a basement below the ground. So the mosque authorities went with the basement, and what you see is a proposal of some of the things. I mean, it's not a symmetrically looking mosque, and this is what some of the reviews or how looking at some of the old photographs and some of the remains and all those things, we made this thing. To surprise, it took a few years because by that time certain governmental changes have taken place. The government said that they will fund only the restoration of the mosque. They will not fund the construction of the new mosque. But the mosque authorities went ahead with it, and this is what has happened. And the demolition started just before Corona, and during the Corona, work happened. There were some limitations. The work was slow, and you can see if anybody visits the mosque now, you can see a new mosque in its place, which you can see here as part of it. I mean, looking at some period mosque in the same area. I mean, it's lighting a lamp is very unusual. It's a Hindu custom, but in this mosque you can see a lamp being lit. And these are some of the timber members were damaged. So we just try to, this is after the restoration of the mosque is over. The basement, the extension of the mosque, which is below the ground, is undergoing. Work is still happening in that mosque, in that building. So this was the first floor of the mosque, which has been restored. And this is an extension. It's a new extension, but we use the traditional techniques, the traditional joineries, and all those things to restore the mosque to its old position. And if you look at that, you see the name Musri's is not unique or traditional to. It's not part of the Kerala name. The old name was Muchiri Pattanam, and Kodungallur. There were so many, Mahodevaram, Tiruvanchikulam. There are so many old names to this Musri's port. Musri's is the name given by the rocks and by the Romans and Greeks to this old port city. The Israelis or the Jews used to call it Shinkli, and the Arabs used to call it Malabar because this was the most prominent port of that area. When we started the project, working on the project, there was a confusion, which area is Musri's, where is the port? Because even now we don't know where exactly the port was. There was no evidence. Some of the excavations done, which was post 2006, 2007, showed clear remains or excavated things which showed the linkage with the Mediterranean and the Rome, with various various kind of objects which were discovered in the excavation. So you can see the word Muziris was not at all common, because that is why we borrowed the name from the Romans and the Greeks, and used this because there was a dispute among the local community which area is Muziris, the smaller there was a kind of dispute. So, but the word Muziris became very common. You can see Center for Training and Exhibition of Natural Fiber. When I had written the master plan, I had clearly said how Muziris should be branded, because the order which I was appointed as the consultant for the project, it was saying Kodungalur Heritage Project. So when I wrote the master plan, I have suggested that the project should be renamed as Muziris Heritage Project, and it was renamed as Muziris Heritage Project. So there was a clear kind of thing which happened. I mean, the people took over the project, and you can see so many initiatives, local initiatives happened in the project. Godurutha Muziris Heritage Development and Charitable Society. See, in Europe and the Western countries, these things, people are aware of the value of heritage. But Manoj tried to give a very, very, very pessimistic picture of how the heritage in India is neglected. So we are just trying to overcome this thing that heritage can be a tool for development. Heritage can bring in tourism. Heritage can bring in visitors. And also it is a project for the future generation. So you can see so many initiatives happened after this was done. So we have to look at in the event of the climate change and how the sea level is rising. Scientists, IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is suggesting that very clearly that the sea level is going to rise by 2100. 1 meter sea level will rise. If 1 meter sea level rises, many of these historic ports and historic cities could be under constant threat of flooding and waterlogging. I mean, which we can see. I mean, the first speaker, Carola Hain, has mentioned in her speech how Venice is undergoing the flooding and whatever is, the flooding which is happening. So we have to assume this reality. And I agree with her with most of the points what she has said, or all the points which she has said, that we have to be resilient. So it is not, we should not be running after the tourism alone. We have to look at this. But for us in India or in Kerala, conservation of the built heritage is the next stage of development. In this, what we are trying to do is to recycle the whole building, which is one of the best things we can do. In Muziris, what we have done, innumerable number of buildings. Manoj has said more than 40 sites, but in some of the sites, there are multiple number of buildings. So we have looked at conservation of the buildings, and we are just trying to keep the construction of the new buildings to be kept to the minimum. Aleppi, which is also one of the other projects, heritage projects, which has happened after the Muziris project. I mean, there has been Talasheri Heritage Project, Ponnani Heritage Project, Kollam Heritage Project, Manar Heritage Project, Travancore Heritage. Now there are at least 10 heritage projects in Kerala following the footsteps of the Muziris Heritage Project. So Aleppi, which is again a port city, but the port is 18th century, which is there. And when we went to look at this, there were canals. There were 2 canals. Aleppi is called the Venice of the East. There are 2 canals, and the canals cannot be called canals. It is drains. I mean, waste drains. That is what you see. All the waste are dumped here. All the hotel waste, all the waste from the houses are going into this. And once this was used as navigation, boats used to run through this place. And the tire factories or spice factories situated along the canal side, you can see historical building. They used to load and unload into the traditional country boats. But that was the golden era of Aleppi historic city. Now it is the drain, all the waste are dumped, and this is what. So, when we were asked to do the heritage conservation or make a master plan, one of the things which was very clear is that unless the canals are cleaned, the city, we cannot think about heritage conservation project. We cannot think about conservation of the historic buildings. So what if we just look at this, what we can, and the main canal, there are so many small canals leading to the main canal. That is also there. So there is no point in cleaning up the main canal without cleaning up the sub canals or the smaller canals. So what I'm just showing is the before and after picture. What you see on the left is the before cleaning, and what you see on the right is after cleaning. I mean, the water was pumped up. We had to rebuild some of the walls. So you can see a massive cleaning effort. It's not cleaning effort, it's to make the water clean. We just wanted to change the waste drains into water canals, where we just wanted, one of the things which we said in one of the initial meetings was that we will give the water and the canals back to the people of Aleppi. But you've seen some of the picture, how dirty it was. I mean, this is after cleaning up some of the canals, what I'm doing, and the life returned back. People started fishing, which was there, which was absent. Nobody, when I met some of the people and doing the initial study, some of the people said the water was so clean that we can see the bottom of the canal. The fish life, which has disappeared, fish life came back. I put more pictures just to say that it did not happen in one area as such. People have started swimming in the canals, which was highly dirty and unpolluted and all those things. And this is one of the things when the canals were done, during one of the festivals, all the boats kayaking and all the boats started going through the canals, which was one of the nice sights. And these canals where no single boat has traveled for decades. I mean, the water transport was restored as part of the thing. Now, as part of the project, heritage project, under the leadership of Manoj Kumar and the team, we are creating a pedestrian pathway. We are creating a cycling pathway, all those things, and cleaning up the sides of the canal as part of the project. This is one of the mosques which has been restored as part of the heritage project. You can see another, so we are just trying to create an awareness by conserving mosques and churches and temples and ordinary buildings as part of this. Is one of the kaya factories which has been restored. The sides of the canals, I said, this photograph was taken before. Now the pedestrian pathways and cycling pathways are being made on the side of the canal, because the first thing what we tried was to clean the canals as part of the project. And the buildings along the canals were conserved. And during the pandemic, we had exhibitions in that. We are setting up various museums, like Manoj has said before. But museums, to set up museums, we need to do some research, collect objects, and plan how it is to be done. So we had a major painting exhibition of more than 250 artists in these kaya factories as part of it. So what I'm just trying to show, this is the same building which has been conserved, and painting, artist exhibitions are going on. This is one of the port museums which is there, which was in a dilapidated with snakes and wild growth was there. We have restored or conserved the building, and painting exhibitions happening there. This happened last year, and during this time of the year. During this time of the year, exhibition was going on in these places. All old factory buildings, which is conserved to be set up museums as part of the Kerala government program. But painting exhibitions happen this way. So what we try to do as part of the heritage projects, we are trying to find opportunities even in the pandemic stage. The future might stay pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And a lot of changes are happening within the Kerala society or across the world. But history and heritage has to be conserved. We had to find a way how to conserve our history and heritage, how to have a sustainable model of tourism as part of the projects. And that is very important. And that's what we are trying to go through, look into the various aspects into this project. And because we want to do it because this is our heritage, and let us conserve this heritage for the future generations, because we think that everything depends on the future generations. For us, it is a tool for development. We are using heritage as a tool for development. We are using heritage as a tool for bringing in sustainable tourism. That is what we want to do for the future generation. We don't want to destroy our nature. We don't want to destroy our rivers. We don't want to pollute our canals. How can we improve our infrastructure? We know how we are different from the other countries. So we want, this is one of the experience. We did not follow any models across the world. We try to find our own model for how to do sustainable tourism, how to do development of look at it as a developmental project. We wanted to look at how to improve our infrastructure. We are not doing anything for the tourists, but all the tourists can come and enjoy the history and conservation which is happening in these cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny. That's wonderful. Inspirational as always listening to you. I think, we had three fantastic speakers. We had Professor Caroline setting the scene for port cities and taking that holistic approach to cultural landscapes and waterscapes, and the challenges with climate change and the rapid growth of tourism. And then we had Dr. Manoj Kumar calling a spade with the situation of museums in India, situation of museum development in India, and presenting, the potential landscape for social, cultural, economic, and environmental development of Kerala. And then we had Dr. Benny Kuriakose from a conservation point of view. But again, all the three have taken a total approach, something very rare in tourism in India, while it's quite common in Europe. So now the time for questions and discussion. Dr. Hayana is not able to join us. She has another commitment, but we have Dr. Manoj Kumar. Tamsin, if you could focus on Dr. Manoj Kumar. Yeah, there he is. Wow, look at that library in the background, Manoj ji. And okay, please type in your questions in the chat box, and Dr. Tamsin Gilbert will read them out. Now, while people are typing their questions in, I have some questions. When you look at, I'm one of the people who has been privileged to see the transformation of Mattancherry, not as closely as you both would have seen it. But what I found is that the sensitivity with which there was engagement using creativity, educational systems, intergenerational dialogue through schools in transforming the landscape of Fort Kochi, Mattancherry, into a biennale site, and then creating throughout the year activities so that the place is vibrant throughout the year, not just during every 2 years during the biennale. Where did this conceptualization come from? Because the famous late Envisa, who was probably the first, he was the first African curator of Venice Biennale and Guangzhou Biennale, and also first to be a curator of documentary, you name it, he was a leading person. When he came to Muziris, he came to Mattancherry, which is the site of the Kochi Muziris Biennale. He saw it and he basically said, look, this is as good as Venice Biennale, if not better. Now that actually, both Krishnamachari, myself, and all the others, we thought is the ultimate compliment from one of the greatest curators of our times. How did this transformation take place? What is it that drives Kerala? I want to know, as somebody not coming from Kerala, what is it that drives? Is it policy? Is it the vision? Is it a culture of distributed living along backwaters and across the landscape rather than concentrated cities? Either of you, sort of Manoj, you might want to answer. Benny, up to you. I'll leave it up to you. Could you answer that, please? Share with us your wisdom. You have to unmute.
Oh, sorry, we've got you on mute.
Yeah, Manoj, you want to say first or?
No, let me hear from the master.
Okay. See, the thing is that Musiris project started in 2006 when we had a visionary in the then finance minister, Dr. Thomas Isaac. He put it in the first budget. He grew up in the Musiris area as a child. What he did was, there was so much history when he was growing up as a child. But when he grew up, a lot of history has been lost. So he said, let us have so he started it as a course. Let us have a course in Musiris area, non-formal education, which will run. That's how. So this he has put it in the first budget, which he has put. I met him in 2007. I mean, after the first budget, he asked me, can you do this project? So when we did this project, we looked at it in a holistic manner. We worked on the project. The Binale is to be credited to Bose Krishnamachari and Riaz Komo. They were the two artists who were spearheading the Binale. They got inspiration, might be from the Venice Binale. Venice Binale, which takes place in historic buildings and historic city. They wanted to start in Kochi. That is why it is called. First, it was supposed to be in Kochi. So Binale, the idea started in 2010. And the first Binale happened in 2012. Why it is called Kochi Musiris Binale is that when the first Binale happened, there was some lot of fund shortage and the government did not support it properly. And the first initial funding has gone from the Musiris Heritage Project. So the name was in. The idea was that the Binale will take place in Kochi and Musiris. At that time, the idea Bose and me and Dr. Thomas Isaac and Riaz had was that Kochi is the daughter and Musiris is the mother. Kochi has 600 years of history. Musiris has 3,000 years of history. So let us have it like a mother and daughter in a historic setting, and that will bring a lot of ideas and interest into that. But in Musiris was not, I mean, there was some, it did not happen in Musiris much, except some isolated shows which happened in Musiris. So that is what has happened. So although the name, a lot of people ask me, Kochi Musiris Binale, what is happening in Musiris? So it is, so both are two parallel events which happened. I don't think that Bose Krishnamachari and Riaz Komu, he got inspired by the Musiris Heritage Project. I will say no. It just happened in the Matanjeri and Fort Kochi.
And now you're extending to Alpuja, right?
Now we have extended it to Alappuzha. That is one of the things which Bose and I had discussed in one of the meetings. Bose Krishnamachari was the managing trustee or the founder trustee, and we wanted to extend it to Aleppi or Alappuzha, which we wanted to do. So as part of that, we had that artist exhibition. But there are a lot of logistic issues and it is to be done by the Kochi Binale Foundation. They have Kochi Foundation. It's for them to take it up. It is for the government. I mean, Musiris and Aleppi, both the sites are run by the Kerala government of Kerala, and we will give the assistance to them to run it. And the funding has also gone from the government of Kerala to the Binale. I won't say the full funding. Some part of the funding has gone from this thing to there. So both are two independent projects. One has happened in a non-governmental sector, whereas the heritage project has taken part 100% in the government sector. So there is a difference, and it's not easy for the government to do a project of this nature in such a short time.
Over to you, Manoj.
Yeah, I do have a different story for this. I mean, what Dr. Benny was explaining was about the project. I would like to go a little behind this. In fact, I believe the question that you asked was regarding the magic that happened in Cochin. What happened exactly? What's the whole crux of what we have seen in Cochin, the transformation. In fact, I know Kochi even from my childhood because that was my ancestral town. I am from Cochin. So Cochin was always a melting pot of different cultures. You had all this, old colonial buildings, British, Dutch, and the Portuguese. And you could see that by name, you could see by character, you could see it by the architectural style. At the same time, it was also in a kind of a dilapidated situation. And over the years, it became a blight of the city. The whole shift of development and economic activity started shifting to Ernakulam, and Cochin became a kind of a backyard. And it naturally went into kind of what we call the downtown movement or whatever it is. Like, it became a kind of a shady area where you get all sort of negatives that happen. So that time, in fact, I started my career as a teacher in TKM, and my professor, Professor KT Ravindran was my professor. And at that time, he came up with an interesting, monologue on Fort Cochin along with Devi Prasad, which was supported by Intact. So during that time, we went there and we saw the entire thing. And it was, for me, it was very kind of, eye opener, where, you can see the whole street lying, vacant and no activity there. And it's all history, history, history. And later what happened was when I started and I joined TKM College of Engineering, where we had a consultancy cell, we were asked to work on conserving that particular area, Fort Cochin Conservation Project, where Professor Eugene and Ramaswamy and myself were engaged in documenting the whole area. So we started documenting the whole place. And I remember we going with the students and staying there for 1 or 2 months and documenting the whole buildings, going inside the buildings. And that was the time. And along with that time, something interesting that happened was there were a few buildings that came up where, small entrepreneurs, artists joined together, like, Kashi Art Cafe, etc., etc. Small art cafes and all started coming up. Artists started joining there, and they started creating, their own spaces. And at the same time, what happened was there was a kind of a movement of Kashmiri, immigrants as part of business. They extended to all over India. They came down to this particular place, and they started their own enterprises, small, artifacts and selling centers where they used to sell all these mementos and all. That was the start, in fact. And then what happened was this became a happening place. Slowly people started coming up there in search of art, in search of food, in search of, then all this conservation projects started coming up there. That was the thing. And maybe it was the right time for Kerala to come up with a kind of a new venue for all these things, to happen. So that was the need of the society, I believe. So it was a combination of the need of the society and the vision of that particular, local self-government that created this spot, along with Intact's initiative, where KT Ravindran's report. So somehow, maybe it was a destiny for Cochin. It was reinvented. So the reinvention happened because of these three things happened together, and that was the start. And the balance story that you heard from Dr. Benny. So that was how it was.
Thank you so much, Manoj and Benny. I mean, I'm going to go back to the recording because, you spoke from your heart, but like an expert on built environment, Manoj, I want to go back to it to understand, because I've been coming to Matancheri for some time. And in fact, when Sudarshan Chetty started his first day as the curator of the second Biennale, I was running a workshop in David Hall on participatory cultural mapping. And I realized that even though cultural mapping is very loosely used in India as well as elsewhere in the world, that people in Kerala are actually doing participatory cultural mapping. You are actually involving people. So I think it's the right kind of methodologies. It's not only the vision of people like Dr. Thomas, who is so passionate and so full of energy. It's amazing to have a leader like that, and to have, a conservation architect like Dr. Benny, who is culturally, engaged and ethically engaged, and to have a young leader like you, Manoj. You're younger than all of us. And the way you recounted the evolution of the concept is inspirational. Thank you so much. Tamsin, there's someone who wanted, you going to read it out, the question?
We have a question from CEO Young Kim. Did you want to unmute to ask your question, or should I read it for you? I'm not sure if we have them there. Yes, please. I'll read it. hello, thank you for the wonderful presentations. My research area is city branding, including museums. Could you let me know how many museums currently are in India?
Amar, you can try to tell. I think the number
Yeah,
is.
well, according to the Ministry of Culture, there are about 2,000 museums in India. But I want to hear more from, Kerala. How many museums are there in Kerala? And then, Manoj was giving a statistic of 29 museums in the area he's dealing with. And Benny has worked on several. So why don't you both answer that question from a Kerala perspective?
Manoj, you can say.
In fact, I don't exactly know the numbers, but I know that there are around 100 museums in Kerala of different sizes and different content. So major museums, if you ask me, hardly there are 5 or 6 museums all over Kerala, major museums, but we do have lots of small museums. And one thing that happened along with this, Dr. Thomas Isaac, who initiated is the kind of culture, to look into this as and taking museum as part of this entire program. That's where I seriously wanted to focus on to, as far as my presentation was concerned. I was trying to reinstate that I will say that this is the first, and maybe it is the best idea that we can adapt to a situation like Kerala, where we do have a very, very kind of, dense living density, 6,000 people per square kilometer. And it's a kind of a long, continuous urban agglomeration starting from Trivandrum to Kasaragod. So, the problem is that, as I told you in the presentation, we don't have the culture of museum. In fact, we don't have, our people don't go into museum. I'll cite you one good example. In Kollam, there is one interesting museum, police museum. I think it was the first police museum in Kerala, and it's a beautiful building, an old building, and you do have the entire, artifacts and entire collectibles belonging to the evolution of the police force in Kerala. But hardly, not even 6 people visit there in a month. It's almost closed, I should say. So this is how museums are taken up by people here. So we do have museums, but I should say that mostly museums are kind of places for what do you call the study trips by students, along with history teachers, or maybe from the schools, they do go there. But the culture of museum, where people do go and engage with these things, they own it, that's not it's not there. I should say that it's that's what my understanding is.
But Manoj, you talked about living museums.
Yes,
that was music to my ears, given that I'm an advocate and I've worked on eco museums from Croatia to Vietnam to Australia.
Yeah.
If one were to apply your concept of living museums, I think the whole of Kerala is a series of museums.
Yes.
waiting to be reanimated through what you call storytelling.
Yes.
So I think the future looks good because you got those synergies of government policy, people ready to open up and take community cultural action.
Yes.
And you got experts who are from Kerala taking responsibility for leading the way. I think the future is very exciting in Kerala. And also knowing Dr. Venu Vasudevan, one of the few people who leads by policy in implementation, I think the stars are in the right place. So you can start sailing, not outwards, but along the coast.
Yeah.
Given stars are very important for Kerala with waterscapes. All right. I think, Tamsin,
yes, we have another question from Roma Sony. Roma, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Sorry. Just gonna get my camera in place. Oh, you sorry. So, Dr. Benny, you were talking about. Am I muted? No.
Go ahead.
Dr. Benny, you.
Yeah, we can hear.
Would,
can tell.
sorry.
Yeah.
Dr. Benny, you were talking about. All right, thank you. So Dr. Benny, you were talking about heritage buildings and then you spoke about waterscapes too. So is it all inclusive when you're addressing the heritage issues, restoring, recovering, reformulating heritage buildings and spaces and geography generally? Is it, are you working in a certain, the structure that you follow, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, I'll just try to answer. It's a very elaborate question and it's very difficult to talk about the approach or the vision of the Musiris Heritage Project in a very short time, because it's a project which has been going on for almost 14 years. But I'll try to answer. You see, we are trying to see it as in a holistic manner. We are trying to see it as a conservation project. Its primary objective is conservation. The secondary objective is non-formal education, because children can come here, the school children can come here and learn about different layers of history, because everybody has left a trace. There are not many places across the world which has such a continuous history. You can look at a monument which is 2000 years old. You can look at a monument which is 100 years old. You can look at something which is 500 years old. So there is a tremendous history lying in the area. But unfortunately, this area was lying dormant till this project started. That is one of the things. So we are trying to see it as an alternate approach to heritage management. What happens in India, in many other, see here the Archaeological Survey of India does the conservation. They're not bothered about tourism at all. They are not bothered about what happens to the local community. I have no complaints. I'm not criticizing them or anything matter. Here we wanted to look at a project which will involve conservation, which will involve non-formal education, which will involve local development, which will involve sustainable tourism in a broader sense. For us, natural environment is also very important. The built environment is also very important. And we have brought intangible heritage in a very, very conscious manner into this project. So we have built performance spaces in this place. And we have documented intangible heritage. We are just trying to create an awareness about different aspects of heritage, which will in the long term will bring in tourism. For us, even school children will be visiting our monuments is very much a part of tourism. We are not trying to look only at foreign tourists. We are not only looking at non-Kerala tourists. We are looking at internal tourists and local, school children and the adult population of Kerala coming and learning about their own history, which is in different layers. And where the water body is also important. See, what we do in Musiris Heritage Project, Manoj mentioned that we do the trip along the boat service. We have solar boats in the project. We want to make minimum footprint on the environment. So we run in boats. So people come in cars, they park in 2-3 places where we have visitor centers. They park the cars there and they get into the boat, because boat transport is one of the most sustainable transport means. That is why the Kerala government has announced this as the first green project of the government of Kerala. So we are trying to see it in a holistic sense. Kerala is a small state. It doesn't have huge economy or industries or anything. And Kerala is realizing more than 20% of the GDP of Kerala is from tourism. And it's considered to be one of the best destinations in the world. For us to spend money on these things is not very easy, because small state budget is very, very small, but the population, 6,000 people per square kilometer, the population, no, it's not square kilometer. It's the population is huge. We have a lot of issues, developmental issues. That's why the government of Kerala is seeing this as a next step of development, which means you are trying to develop a whole area around thing, and you are looking at the local resources, which includes natural resources, built heritage, as well as intangible heritage. use these resources as the next stage of development. Because this is the only way Kerala can develop, because of the high density of population, very fragile nature, forest on one side, sea on the other side, in between you have the backwaters and lagoons. And we have the problem of the climate change and global warming coming up. We face the problem of floods, we face the problem of landslides, we face the problem of coastal erosion. So we are just trying to develop, so trying to look at the local resources, trying to find how the local resources can become useful products for our own future generation as well as for the tourists. That is why I said we have not followed any models from across the world. We try to develop this strategy and what we should be doing in this. It is very, very difficult to explain it in half an hour, but I just tried to just say in briefly, I try to answer the question. And Manoj will be able to add to my point.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The reason I was also
Manoj, do you
asking
want
is
to add
because
to
when
that,
you
Manoj?
address
No,
spaces, geography, and water bodies,
Yeah.
you're restoring Kerala in a
Thanks, Roma.
very
Dr. Manoj, do
comprehensive.
you want to add?
Sorry,
yeah, in fact,
very comprehensive, very holistic. Sorry, thank you.
I should say that this is a very unique approach. I sincerely appreciate Dr. Thomas Isaac and Dr. Benny. In fact, I was thrilled to see this project that came up, years back. In fact, I'm teaching. I was teaching, and I'm still, my primary lean is a teacher at the university, Kerala University, where I'm teaching urban design. So as far as I'm concerned, I feel that this is a very unique and very different kind of approach, how these people have taken it up. So as I told you, it's not very easy, even from the tourism perspective. When you look at the state, the concept of looking at destinations, it is already there. But if you look at the tangible and intangible heritage of the place, throughout Kerala, starting from Kanyakumari down south up to Kasaragod, the entire area, it's full of tangible and intangible heritage of different kind of expressions, whether it is buildings, whether it is festivals, whether it is food, cuisine. And this is one project where it integrates all those things together. But at the same time, they are not larger projects. It's a wonderful exercise. Small projects being executed, and then it is getting connected. It is connected by the movement networks. And how wonderful it is, when you connect two nodes with some sort of a movement network, and obviously all the small things that comes in this place, it can be a small market, it can be a small junction, it can be a small kind of what do you call this, temple, node, whatever it is, it becomes meaningful in this whole process. So what are you creating is multiple loops where, you can use each of these loops. For example, Dr. Benny was speaking, these different nodes by the history, the whole depending on what connection, this was our primary connections in the past. So it is basically trying to reinvent that. So as the first speaker in this session, I remember how to respect water. You're looking at the water as a kind of a relooking water, reinventing the city with the help of water. If you look at it that perspective, Kerala is basically interlaced with water. And this project is coming up with such a beautiful thing that all these different heritage nodes are being connected with water. So if we look at it from the environmental perspective, if you look at from the cultural perspective, if you look at from the urban design perspective, if you look at the economic perspective, if you look at the people's participatory process perspective, every perspective, this is a perfect model. I should say that this is going to be a lead example how to look at tourism, how to look at heritage conservation, how to link it with the local economy and development. And let me call it as the living museum experiment.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Benny. It's wonderful. How exciting and how sad that we could not meet on site, or but we are meeting online. But I'm sure that we'll all connect in wonderful waterscapes of Kerala. It's a whole chain of connection. I think that Dr. Manoj Kumar, I think that given your urban design background, I think you directly or indirectly referred to layers of significance, assessing different layers of significance, translating them into narratives, whether it's storytelling or it's interpretation, taking in, both of you have illustrated beautifully, along with Professor Kerala Hein, on how to take integrated local area planning as an approach, intersectorial, interdepartmental, interdisciplinary approaches. I mean, this is something that both in Australia and Canada, we could not do anything unless you had an integrated local area plan, which also had to take into consideration cultural diversity. And I think Kerala is doing, the international best practice, demonstrating it. But one thing, may I say, if anyone else has got any questions, please type them in. We are closing in about 5 minutes for a short break. One thing I noticed, and I hope you don't mind my saying this, after all, I'm an Australian and a foreigner, and here being moderated by Tamsin Gilbert, another Australian. One thing I noticed, I think the melody of India, the sad thing about India is there are too many parachute consultants. And I think the wonderful thing about Kerala is that there you are, there's Benny, there is, the Kochi Musri's Biennale driven by two famous artists, and both locally. You got expertise, and you honor and respect the local expertise, and they're internationally renowned. And I think this is what sets Kerala apart. I mean, you are the only state to have a additional chief secretary who has worked as the DG of a national museum, the one who opened up the National Museum and actually promoted intangible heritage as a major discourse in India when he was the joint secretary. So it's having that collective leadership in Kerala is what is exciting for us, and so much the rest of India we could learn from you. Rest of the world also could learn from you, from the way you do things. Are there any other questions? If there are no other questions, we'll be taking a short break of about half an hour. And then we have three fantastic presentations. One from Professor Diti Vyas, about subverting narratives in tourism so that children's voices, children's literature is empowered, enabled. She's a global expert on lullabies as intangible heritage. Something you hear in Kerala along the backwaters. I've traveled quite a bit in Kerala. Sometimes in the evenings you hear lullabies being sung, if you're quiet and you listen. And then we've got Professor Venice Guri Shankar from Mauritius. She's somebody, an expert on tourism planning, tourism management, and helping, sort of how to make graduates from architecture and design industry prepared to work in the real world of where tourism is the biggest, industry, if you will. I mean, it'll soon become again the biggest industry of growth. And then we got Professor Subbalakshmi Mahapatra, the artisanal dilemma, given the pandemic and the post-pandemic situation. Artisanal dilemma that she's going to focus on. Those are the three major presentations that we'll have from 8 o'clock Indian Standard Time. Am I right, Thompson? 8 o'clock Indian Standard Time?
I was just double checking that. Let me just, I believe that's the time.
But in the meantime, thank you so much, Dr. Benny Kurikos, Dr. Manoj Kumar.
Yes, it is 8 o'clock Indian Standard Time.
We really appreciate your sharing, and I think it fits in so well. When Carol comes to India, we'll bring a, sort of, because she and I are working, discussing a project. So I think that she would love to come to Kerala. We'll plan it. But how well the three presentations have addressed the need for integrated local planning area approaches for holistic perceptions of tangible and intangible, and how do we manage them together, new paradigms of heritage management. For me, music is living museums because I'm an eco-museum fanatic, bringing people and the heritage together. And that honoring, local knowledge systems, as Dr. Benny Kuriakose does so well, gives a new twist, new meaning to that conventional notion of vernacular, as he does so well. It's been a fantastic session. Thank you, both of you. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all the listeners and people who asked the questions. Please join us at 8 o'clock for the next three presentations.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
So, Tamsin, are you going to stop the session?
Yes.